Don't worry why I'm in black and white, I'll explain that in a minute. So, for this project, I decided to make a Google Translate fail video. If you're not familiar with the format, allow me to explain. So, basically, you take something, whether that be song lyrics or instructions on how to wash your hands or make a face mask, and then you translate it through Google Translate into dozens of different languages, and then finally back into English until you end up with something completely incomprehensible, absurd, and very funny. This works because Google Translate is a very flawed translating system. It's an algorithm. There's no person actually doing the translations, so mistakes are very easy to come by. Now, in this video, I'll be explaining the Kabbalistic tree of life. Why did I pick that subject? Because it's very complicated, and so therefore Google Translate had a very easy time messing it up. So, the normal sections, where I'm just going to be explaining it normally, will be in black and white, like now, whereas the translated sections will all be in color, a little something like this. So, what is Kabbalah, or Kabbalah? Kabbalah is an esoteric tradition within Jewish mysticism going back thousands of years. What is Kampala? Cabaret magic has been a mystery to the Jews for thousands of years. There are other types of Kabbalah as well, each with their own different spellings. There's Christian Kabbalah, spelled with a C, a Christian interpretation of Kabbalah, and then there's Hermetic Kabbalah, spelled with a Q, a Hermetic interpretation of Kabbalah. Several recipients, each has its own characteristics. Kaaba Christian letter C, interpretation of Kaaba Christianity, Kaaba SG, and Kaaba Quintuppa K. What I'll be talking about today will mostly be relevant to Jewish and Hermetic Kabbalah. I talked about the issues of the Jews of the Caribbean. Now, Kabbalah is super complicated and headache-inducing, and also I'm not super knowledgeable about it yet, so I'll only be discussing one aspect of it, the Tree of Life. Collections are contracted for now, because I think it gave me a headache, of course. Have you been here? The Tree of Life is a metaphorical representation of how the universe is structured from a Kabbalistic perspective. The Tree of Life shows how the concept of Kabara is introduced to the world. That's the important thing to remember. It's purely metaphorical, abstract, philosophical, however else you want to describe it. The point is that symbols are common and philosophical if you want to define it. The circles, or sephirot as they're called, and the pathways between them aren't representations of physical places. The Tree of Life isn't a cosmology the same way that Dante Alighieri's cosmologies of heaven, hell, and purgatory are. So what do the sephirot represent? The so-called spiral size does not represent the body cavity. Cosmology is not a Tree of Life, but this is a common pathology presented by Dante Alighieri. So what is Sephiroth? First, I need to talk about Ein Sof. Ein Sof, simply put, is the concept of infinity, of everything. To quote Peter Moorbacher, there is no word that does not describe it. At first, I wanted to talk with closed eyes, but the idea of rug is an endless resource for everyone. His name is Peter Muhlbach, lack of commentary. Now, infinity is obviously an impossible concept for humans to understand and conceptualize, so to make that easier, Ein Sof needs to be filtered down so that humans can understand it. Infinity is a concept that people do not think about today, so that the law can be easily understood by everyone. The Sephirot are exactly that, emanations or specific aspects of Ein Sof that are easier to understand than Ein Sof as a whole. Finally, some shapes are added so that the shape of the faces can be interpreted externally and externally. The word emanation, which I had to split in two because there's no way I'm drawing this twice, comes from the Latin word emanare, meaning to pour out, to flow out, or to spring from, which describes the Sephirot perfectly. They all flow out of or spring from Ein Sof. The word advanced comes from the Latin anana, meaning past, foolish, fear, is a good sign of spirituality. Two pictures, one is Sophie. The Sephirot at the top of the tree are the hardest for humans to understand, with each layer below them getting closer to our own reality and therefore much easier to understand. All our levels are closer to reality and easier to understand than reality. The last thing I'll talk about before explaining each of the Sephirot in detail are the three pillars of the tree. Before I delve into the details about each walnut tree, I want to talk a little bit about the last three pillars of this tree. The tree is separated into three pillars: the pillar of mercy, the pillar of severity, and the pillar of balance. The tree is divided into three parts: the pillar of grace, sacred pillar, and crown. The outer pillars represent polarity, with the pillar of mercy representing things such as substance and expansion, while the pillar of severity represents things such as shape or form and restriction. As its name implies, The pillar of balance represents the balance between them. The outer part is linked to column B, where the column shows the sympathetic distribution of the event. As its name implies, equations are the properties of equations within equations. Sefirot within the same pillar will all have similar meanings. They have the same meaning in a second book. As you've probably noticed, the Tree of Life is also designed to be symmetrical, both from left to right and top to bottom, moving from severity to mercy and more abstract to more grounded. The Tree of Life can be equal, front, from left to right, viewed from below, nice and easy. Anyways, with all of that out of the way, onto the Sefirot themselves. The order I'll be discussing them in is the traditional order called the lightning flash, because it starts at the top of the tree and zigzags its way down. What about Sephirot? Video programming is often called instant because it starts from top down. The first is Keter, the crown of the Tree of Life. The first is Catalina, the crown of the trees of the world. Before Keter are the three veils of nothing, or non-existence, or however else you want to describe them. Basically, the state of the universe before creation. Read the three missed or missed mistakes. This is before the heavenly celebration. Keter represents the point of creation, the moment when something was born out of the infinite nothing, when God spoke the first words and spoke reality into existence. It is a creative place, a time for the events of eternal life that Allahu has already seen and revealed the truth. If you want a more secular perspective, think of the Big Bang Theory, a singularity that rapidly expands and becomes the known universe. Keter is that singularity, and it is from Keter that all of the other Sefirot are derived. If you want more time, try outburst science fiction. The one grew rapidly and became a famous city. This technique is very popular. The second is Chokhmah, another danger. Chokhmah represents growth, expansion, new beginnings, and potential. The moment when a child is born, the moment when that child first opens their eyes and sees the world, that child's first steps, their first words. Wealth is the beginning of growth, new opportunities, and development. When a baby is born, when it opens its eyes and sees the world, when it takes the first steps for the first time. The third is Binah. Third proof. Binah represents restriction, shape and form, knowledge and understanding. One way to understand its relationship with Chokhmah is that if Chokhmah is the moment when a child first opens their eyes and sees the world, then Binah is being able to understand what you're seeing, understanding object permanence, and that what you see in a mirror is just a reflection. Knowledge means acceptance, widowhood, knowledge. Another way to understand the relationship of Chukoma is that Chukoma child opens his eyes and sees the world for the first time. It can be interpreted as something you see without it. Learn more about this fix. What you see in the mirror is a screen. What the fuck? Another way to understand the relationship between Binah, Chokhmah, and Keter is that when writing, Keter is the pen above the page, Chokhmah is the moment the pen and ink touch the page, and Binah is knowing how to write. One way to find out where Catherine is hiding is to place Catherine near her. It is automatic. Without Binah, with only Keter and Chokhmah, then there'll just be a bunch of random splotches of ink all over the paper that no one can understand. You need to have Binah to give the ink shape and form so that others can read it and understand it as language. Unintended pieces are full of dust or defects that no one can understand. You will spend more time with the help you give to others. The fourth is Chesed. Chesed represents love, kindness, empathy, connection, and mercy. It's the force that unites us, that brings us together. Legislative process 4. Chase stands for love, compassion, mercy, compassion. Our husband joined the army. The fifth is Gevorah. Gevorah represents order, harshness, judgment, severity, and separation. It creates divisions, it creates boundaries. The plastic bags of the Quran speak of authority, violence, justice, and oppression. Make partitions and create partitions. Now, especially when compared to Chesed, Gevorah can come across as evil, and in fact many falsely view it that way, but that's entirely incorrect. None of the Sefirot are good or evil, and trying to apply that mindset to Kabbalah as a whole is entirely the wrong way to go about it. You need both Chesed and Gevorah to be balanced, healthy, and functional. In fact, armor seats can be bad, especially when compared to Chesapeake. Most people do the same thing but make mistakes. In Kabbalah, there is nothing good or bad. This is a sheep. Crops and activities are essential for health, weight, and yield. For example, while chesed might sound great, too much of it can lead to naiveness, which people can take advantage of. For example, fishing can be toxic, but being overweight can be confusing. That's why you need a little bit of gevurah to provide harshness and severity so that you aren't taken advantage of. So do not use it because it gives a very nice and complicated design. Additionally, sometimes separation and boundaries can be a good thing. If you have family members in your life that are making you miserable, sometimes cutting ties with them is the only solution. In some cases, there may be severe or inappropriate restrictions, because family life can. He had no choice but to leave his family. Is it harsh and severe? Yes, but sometimes that's needed. Hyper? Orc? Yes, but sometimes. Of course, you don't want to go in the complete opposite direction and only focus on gevurah. That would either just make you miserable or make everyone else around you miserable. In other words, it is difficult to focus elsewhere. It destroys you and those around you. The goal is to find a balance between them. And speaking of balance, our goal is to find a balance and discuss the balance. The sixth is Tiferet. 6 broadcasters. Tiferet represents balance between all of the Sefirot, when they come together to form a beautiful harmony. The box stands for perfect weight. Tiferet is often described as the emanation of beauty, and in fact the word Tiferet itself is often translated in English as beauty. Taipart is often called a beautiful halo. The word can also mean beauty. Tiferet is basically the embodiment of the balance between chesed and gevurah that I was describing earlier, which is why it's in the central pillar and comes immediately after them, but its principle of balance also applies to the other sefirot as well. Yes, as mentioned above, the Quran shows balance in the middle of Libra, but it is also responsible for the principle of measurement. The 7th is Netzach, and the 8th is Chod. Saba Snorex, page 84. Netzach represents drive, impulse, proactiveness, and instinct, while Chod represents reactiveness, logical thinking, and reason. Infinity is a symbol of moving, hunger, and stability. Carbon is a sacrifice, a judgment, and a rational thought. If you're familiar with the concept of the Apollonian and the Dionysian, Chod and Netzach are basically that, with Netzach being the Dionysian impulse and Chod being the Apollonian impulse. If Apollo knew the name Dionysus, it was probably because Netex stole Cyprus and Netex stole Apollo Dionysus. Additionally, Netzach represents resistance while Chod represents submission. NCA machine resistance, NPD sewing machine. The 9th is Yesod. 9 is famous. Yesod is the foundation upon which the world is built. It is the gateway between the spiritual and the material, the point where the abstract becomes the physical. The government has a global foundation. It is a cross between mental and physical activity. Being at the bottom of the tree, it directly parallels Ketach at the top of the tree. It is below the body, so we're the upper body. Ketach represents the point between nothingness and creation, while Yesod represents the point between abstraction and physical reality. And speaking of physical reality, the commercial vehicle means void, nature, and Joshua means physical truth to be physical. The 10th is Malchut. 10 big mistakes. Malchut is the physical world, the reality in which we exist, the bodies we inhabit, and the experiences we have in them. Fasting about this world, real life, and style depends on experience. Being at the very bottom of the tree, Malchut is a culmination of all the other Sefirot before it, containing aspects from each of them. Under the ashes, all the gods were before him and around him. It also directly parallels with Ketach and the 3 veils of nothing. Ketach and the veils of nothing are defined by their unknowability, by their incomprehensibility from a mortal perspective, whereas Malchut, being the physical world, is one of the things that we're the most intimately familiar with. Working directly with Catherine on a 3D movie, screenshot, A Warning is Dead, Malcolm is one of the things we see in the real world. You may have noticed that I skipped over one of the circles. This one here, Da'at. You may have seen me work with you in the 4 areas mentioned above. Da'at is one of the more interesting emanations because it's technically not considered a Sefirot at all. It doesn't have a number, and it's not listed in the traditional lightning flash order. Sephiroth should not be as enthusiastic, as it is not found in Infinitus, the standard electric model. That's because Da'at doesn't have any traits of its own. It's the point at which all of the other Sephirot come back together and become indistinguishable from each other after separating from Keter. Because you do not have special properties. All of the other agents are here, but they do not disappear after Carter. One way I've heard it described is that Da'at is the silent, empty void that is filled by all of the other emanations. Another way to control the fire is to make the main road in a separate room filled with different lights.